My name's Sarah, a 29-year-old accountant with a knack for numbers and a love for a well-balanced budget. I'm married to Alex, a man whose sense of humor is as strong as his love for me. We live in a small, well-appointed apartment I inherited and spruced up over the years. It's our little haven, filled with the laughter and love of a young, happy couple. One lazy Sunday, as I was reconciling some accounts, Alex lounged on the sofa, chuckling at something on his phone. "Hey, money wizard, any chance you can conjure up a feast for lunch?" he joked, looking up at me with a grin. Rolling my eyes, I replied, "With your spending habits? I'd need real magic for that." Our banter was interrupted by the doorbell. It was Mrs. Thompson, Alex's mother, standing at the doorstep with her usual air of disdain hidden poorly behind a strained smile. "Hello, dear," she greeted, her eyes immediately scanning the apartment. "Hi, Mom," Alex said, getting up to hug her. "What brings you here today?" "Oh, just wanted to see how you two are managing in this tiny place," she replied, her voice dripping with a tone that suggested she found our living situation pitiable. I bit my tongue, offering a polite smile. "Would you like some coffee, Mrs. Thompson?" As I set about making coffee, I overheard their conversation from the kitchen. Mrs. Thompson was lamenting her financial difficulties, the costs of maintaining her large, old house apparently overwhelming her. "It's just so much, Alex. I don't know how I'll manage," she sighed dramatically. Alex looked concerned. "Mom, we can help out. Maybe we can give you some money each month, help ease the burden?" My heart sank. We were doing well, but we weren't wealthy. Still, the thought of his mother struggling was enough for Alex to offer. I brought in the coffee, sitting down as they discussed figures. $1,000 a month? Alex suggested, looking over at me for approval. I nodded, masking my concern. "If it helps, Mrs. Thompson, we're happy to help." She accepted with a quick, almost too eager nod. "You're such good children. I don't know what I'd do without you." Yet, as she sipped her coffee, her eyes lingered on the renovated kitchen, the sleek appliances, and the comfortable furniture. "Of course, if you could afford such nice things for yourselves, maybe you could spare a little more," she mused, her voice trailing off suggestively. Alex was about to speak, but I cut in. "We'll start with the 1,000 and see how things go. We have to be mindful of our own expenses, after all." Mrs. Thompson seemed a bit put off, but covered it with a tight smile. "Of course, dear. I appreciate anything you can do." After she left, Alex and I sat in a heavy silence. "Are we doing the right thing?" he finally asked, his brows furrowed in worry. I reached for his hand. "We're helping your mom, that's important. But let's not dive into deep waters we can't swim out of, okay?" He squeezed my hand back, the weight of our decision settling in. "Okay," he agreed, but I could tell the matter wasn't settled in his heart. The rest of the day passed quietly, with both of us lost in our thoughts. The air in the apartment felt different now, charged with the responsibility we had taken on and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. As night fell, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Thompson's visit was just the beginning of a larger challenge we would face together. But whatever it was, we'd face it as a team, as we always did. Weeks after Mrs. Thompson's visit, the routine of our life resumed, the uneasy feeling of the financial commitment lingering like a stubborn fog. Then, out of the blue, we got news that turned our world upside down. I was pregnant. The joy was overwhelming. Alex's face lit up like a Christmas tree when I told him, his laughter echoing in the apartment. "We're going to be parents, Sarah." "Can you believe it?" he exclaimed, lifting me in a whirlwind hug. Laughing and a bit dizzy, I replied, "Believe it? I'm already planning the budget for baby shoes and college." The news of the baby brought a new wave of visits from Mrs. Thompson. One evening, she arrived with an unusual spark in her eye. "I have a proposal for you too," she began, settling herself on the sofa as if preparing for a long discussion. Alex and I exchanged a look, trepidation mixing with curiosity. "What kind of proposal?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's simple. You need more space for the baby, and I need less of a burden. I move in with my daughter, and you move into my house," she declared, her voice carrying a note of finality. I choked on my tea. "Move in, to your house?" The image of her large, run-down home flashed in my mind, the creaky floors and peeling paint a stark contrast to our cozy apartment. Alex, ever the optimist, chimed in. "That's an idea, Mom. But Sarah's right. Your house needs a lot of work." Undeterred, Mrs. Thompson continued. "Think of it, Alex. Your child can grow up in the house you did. And with Sarah's knack for budgeting, you can turn it into something beautiful." I could see Alex's eyes soften at the thought, the sentimental value of his childhood home pulling at him. But practicality nipped at my mind. "It's a big decision, Mrs. Thompson. And a big project. We need to think it over, discuss the costs, the work." But she was on a roll. "You won't get a better offer. Space for the baby, a family home. It's perfect. Think fast, though. I don't want to be a burden on my daughter for long." The conversation spun around us, Alex caught in memories and possibilities, Mrs. Thompson pressing her point, and me, trying to anchor it all in reality. "We'll talk it over," I finally said, cutting through the chatter. "We need time to decide what's best for our family." After she left, the apartment felt too small, the walls closing in with the weight of her proposal. Alex paced, torn between nostalgia and the reality of the massive undertaking. "Sarah, it could be great, right? The baby, the house. But it's a lot," he said, running his hands through his hair. I took his hands, steadying him. "Let's sleep on it. Make lists, pros and cons. We do this right, or not at all." He nodded, the worry lines easing a bit. "You're right. As always. Let's figure this out together." That night, sleep was elusive, the future a jumble of cribs and construction. But as I lay there, listening to Alex's steady breathing, I knew whatever decision we made, we'd face the consequences, good or bad, as one. The thought was a small comfort in the sea of uncertainty that Mrs. Thompson's unexpected proposal had plunged us into. After many sleepless nights and endless discussions, Alex and I decided to take on the challenge. The prospect of creating a loving home for our baby in his childhood house won over the daunting task ahead. "All right, let's do this. But we're doing it our way, no cutting corners," I declared one morning, determination firm in my voice. Alex smiled, his usual optimism shining through. "That's my girl. It'll be our project, our home." The house stood as I remembered, large and looming, its once grand features now dulled by time and neglect. As we walked through the creaking doors, the reality of what we'd taken on hit me. "What have we gotten ourselves into?" I murmured, more to myself than to Alex. He wrapped an arm around me. "Hey, it's going to be great. A bit of paint here, some new floors there." I raised an eyebrow. "And the plumbing, electrics, heating." My voice trailed off as the list grew longer in my mind. "We brought in a designer, Tom, a friend known for his practical yet stylish eye." "Okay, let's see what we've got," Tom said, clipboard in hand, ready to tackle the beast. Room by room, we assessed, planned, and budgeted. The numbers were dizzying, but every decision was made with our future in mind. The workers started, their presence a constant in the once quiet house. Dust and noise became our new normal, but with each completed task, the place began to transform. One particularly chaotic day, as I navigated through ladders and paint cans, I found Alex staring at the nursery, a soft smile on his face. "Can you imagine it, Sarah? Our little one right here?" I joined him, envisioning the room not as it was, but as it would be. "It'll be beautiful, Alex. The perfect place for baby naps and bedtime stories." The days turned into weeks, and slowly the house began to resemble a home. The sagging ceilings were now sturdy and smooth, the walls fresh with paint. The old, grimy windows replaced with clear glass that let the light flood in. Each evening, we reviewed the progress, our excitement growing with every box ticked off the list. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Delays and unexpected repairs tested our patience and budget. "Another issue? What now?" I'd ask, frustration mounting as Tom relayed the latest hiccup. "Plumbing's older than we thought. Needs more work, but we'll get it done," Tom would assure, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to my frazzled nerves. Despite the setbacks, we pushed forward, driven by the vision of our family in this home. And as the final touches were put in place, the house, once a daunting project, stood proud and welcoming, a testament to our hard work and love. Exhausted but elated, we stepped back, taking in the sight. "We did it, Sarah. We actually did it," Alex said, his voice thick with emotion. I leaned into him, the house behind us no longer just a building, but a symbol of our new beginning. "We sure did, love. Now, let's get ready to welcome our little one into it." With that, we turned and walked into our future, ready for whatever it might hold. Just as we settled into our newly renovated home, savoring the calm after months of relentless work, our world was turned upside down again. It was a crisp Saturday morning, and we were out getting some fresh air and much-needed couple time. When we turned the corner onto our street, my heart dropped. A moving truck was parked in front of our house, and men were carrying out our furniture. "What the?" Alex's voice trailed off as we hurried toward the chaos. As we pushed through the front door, the sight that greeted us was like a punch to the gut. Mrs. Thompson and her daughter, Carol, were there, directing the movers with an air of authority that left no room for questions. "What in the world is going on here?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. Mrs. Thompson turned to us, a smirk playing on her lips. "Oh, Sarah, Alex, good, you're here. I've decided it's time I move back into my house." "Your house? We just spent months turning this place around, not to mention the money we poured into it." Alex's voice rose, his usual calm demeanor gone. Carol chimed in, her tone just as cold as her mother's. "Well, it's a family house, and we're family. It's only right we live here. Plus, think of how nice it'll be for my kids in that lovely nursery you fixed up." I felt like I was in a bad dream, the room spinning around me. "But you told us to move in here. You pushed for this. We have a baby on the way, for goodness sake." Mrs. Thompson shrugged, her gaze void of any sympathy. "Things change, dear. I needed a break, and you provided it. But now, it's time for you to go back to your little apartment." The reality of her words hit me like a tidal wave. All our work, all our dreams for this house, were being ripped away without a second thought. I glanced at Alex, his face a mask of shock and hurt. "Mom, you can't do this. We have rights. We'll fight this," he stammered, the fight in his voice not matching the defeat in his eyes. Mrs. Thompson laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "Good luck with that. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a house to settle into." We were ushered out like strangers, our belongings piled haphazardly on the lawn. The movers didn't meet our eyes, their actions mechanical and detached. As we sat amidst boxes and bags, the life we had built within those walls now locked away from us, Alex put his arm around me. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I just never imagined." I leaned into him, the tears I'd been holding back finally breaking free. "It's not your fault, Alex. We were conned, plain and simple." The following days were a blur of anger, disbelief, and an unyielding sense of betrayal. We were back in our apartment, surrounded by boxes that were meant for a different life. Alex was quiet, his usual light extinguished by the shock. I was fuming, pacing the small space like a caged animal. "We need to do something, Alex. We can't let them get away with this," I exclaimed, my voice sharp with frustration. Alex, looking up from the sea of papers he had been sifting through, met my gaze. "I know, Sarah. And I think I have something that might help." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" He held up his phone, a determined glint in his eye. "Remember the day she proposed the switch?" I had recorded the conversation, just a gut feeling. "It's all here, her admitting it was her house, but encouraging us to move in, to invest." I felt a surge of hope, mixed with a bitter satisfaction. That could be our leverage. We contacted a lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Janet who had a reputation for being a bulldog in court. She listened intently as we relayed our story, the recording playing a pivotal role. "This is good," Janet nodded after hearing the recording. "It's not a straightforward case, but it's a start. We'll need more, though. Receipts, contracts, any communication about the renovations." We spent the next few days gathering every piece of evidence we could find. Every receipt felt like a tiny weapon in our fight to reclaim not just the house, but our dignity and future. The day we presented our case to Janet, her office was stark and uninviting, but her focus was unwavering. "This is solid," she said, sifting through the papers. "We'll file for deception and undue influence. It's going to be a battle, but I think we have a shot." The weeks leading up to the court date were tense. We were a mix of nerves and grim determination. The thought of facing Mrs. Thompson and Carol in court made my stomach churn. On the day, as we sat in the sterile courtroom, I held Alex's hand tightly. Mrs. Thompson and Carol sat across from us, their faces masks of cool indifference. As the proceedings began, Janet was fierce, laying out our case with a precision that left no room for doubt. Mrs. Thompson's lawyer tried to counter, but the recording, the receipts, they all painted a clear picture of deceit. When it was Mrs. Thompson's turn to speak, her voice was shaky, a stark contrast to the confident, almost smug tone she had used when kicking us out. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just needed some help, and I thought." "Thank you, no further questions," Janet cut her off, turning back to the judge with a nod. The rest of the trial was a blur of legal jargon and closing arguments. As we waited for the judge to deliver his verdict, I felt Alex's hand grip mine, his palm sweaty. The judge finally looked up, his gaze sweeping over the courtroom. "After reviewing the evidence and testimonies, I find in favor of the plaintiffs. It is clear that there was a calculated effort to mislead and benefit from their investments." Relief flooded through me, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. Alex let out a long breath, his body sagging slightly. As we walked out of the courtroom, the world seemed a little brighter, a little more hopeful. "We did it," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Alex pulled me into a hug, right there on the courthouse steps. "We did," he agreed, his voice steady and sure. "And now, we move forward." The battle was over, but the war had left its scars. As we started the journey back to our apartment, the future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: we were stronger together, and no matter what came next, we would face it as a team. After the legal victory, the weight of the past months began to lift, but the task of truly moving on was still ahead of us. The first order of business was to clear out the house, our house, as the court had affirmed, at least in terms of the investment we'd made. Alex and I returned, not as residents, but as reclaimers of our peace and investment. We methodically removed every piece of furniture, every appliance, and even the fancy new plumbing fixtures we'd installed. Each item carried out was a chapter of our ordeal, closed and packed away. "I can't believe we're stripping the house bare," Alex said, his voice echoing in the now hollow space. "It's only what we put into it," I reminded him, my voice firm with a resolve that hadn't been there before. As we worked, Mrs. Thompson arrived, her eyes wide as she saw the shell of what had once been her home. She began to sob, her body shaking with each heave. "Please, I didn't mean for any of this. I'm so sorry. Can't we just forget all this happened?" she pleaded, her voice desperate. Alex and I exchanged a look, the shared pain and betrayal still fresh between us. "We're beyond sorry now," Alex said. "We're just doing what's fair." With the house emptied of our contributions, we also cut the financial cord that had bound us to Mrs. Thompson. The monthly checks we had been sending were no more. It was a hard decision, but necessary for us to truly start anew. The final blow to Mrs. Thompson's crumbling world came when she had to face the financial consequences of her actions. In order to reimburse us for the extensive and costly renovations, she was forced to sell the house. The place that had been a symbol of her deceit now had to be let go, the proceeds going towards paying us back. The news of the sale came to us not with joy but with a quiet acknowledgement of the closure it brought. We had no desire to revel in her downfall, we simply wanted to move forward. In the end, Mrs. Thompson stood in the doorway of what was once her home, now belonging to another family, her eyes red from tears. "I'm so sorry," she whispered again, her voice lost in the shuffle of movers and the bustle of new occupants. We left her there, her apologies a faint echo in our determined stride away. Our path led back to our apartment, to the life we had been building before everything went awry. We walked hand in hand, not looking back. The apartment welcomed us with open arms, its walls ready to be filled with new memories and laughter. And as we settled back into the rhythm of our life, the nursery awaiting its occupant, we knew that we had come out of this stronger. We had fought for our future, for our family, and no matter what else lay ahead, we would face it together. Life has a funny way of smoothing out the edges after a storm. Our apartment, once a temporary shelter, had transformed back into a loving home. With the past finally behind us, Alex and I focused on the future, especially with our baby's arrival just around the corner. One evening, as I was arranging some baby clothes, Alex came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "You know, I can't wait to meet our little one. It's like the start of something amazing, isn't it?" he said, his voice warm and excited. I leaned back into his embrace, feeling the gentle kick from our unborn child. "It really is. After everything, this feels like we've been given a fresh start, a new chapter." We spent our evenings planning and dreaming, talking about the kind of parents we wanted to be, the things we wanted to teach our child. The nursery, once a source of contention, was now a haven of hope and anticipation, filled with soft colors and the gentle lullabies that floated from a music box. The day our daughter was born, the world seemed to stand still. She was perfect, a tiny bundle of joy that instantly became the center of our universe. Holding her for the first time, I felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed me. As we sat there, in the quiet of the nursery, the world outside continuing on, I realized that this was what true happiness felt like. It wasn't about the absence of conflict or the avoidance of challenges. It was about facing them head-on, together, and coming out the other side stronger and more united.